Where do we stand right now on the DOGE dividend in terms of it getting approved, enacted? Where does it stand in the process, and what needs to happen for it to become a reality?
What needs to happen is a piece of legislation, full text of a bill being introduced into the US Senate or the US House. I've been meeting with members, me and my team, for the past week and a half, shoring up support, getting really good feedback that we've incorporated into a final bill. We now have that, and we're now narrowing it down to a few sponsors who can actually introduce this bill into the United States Congress so it can get added to the next large package like reconciliation, and then ultimately be signed into law by the president, who has supported this literally since it was introduced.
Who is your likely sponsor?
I don't want to break too much news right here, right now, but it's someone who has a history of standing up for everyday hardworking Americans. And I think this person is the perfect advocate, the perfect champion for it. It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of House Republicans who, to your point, Dr. Phil, earlier, want to spend the entirety of the money paying down our debt to countries like China. I say, look, China and our debt holders can get 80% of it, but hardworking Americans, they need a break. They went through hell under the Biden economy. They took on a lot of debt to keep up with the Biden inflation. They need a refund. They need to reshore their finances.
There were a lot of stimulus checks that were paid out during COVID. There were lots of ways that people were supported. There were increases in unemployment. There were extensions in unemployment, rent moratoriums, mortgage moratoriums, a lot of things that were done to help people during COVID. But there were also stimulus checks sent out, some of them $5,400. I believe was the highest. And I can't quote the exact percentages here, but I know the first ones that went out, a substantial material portion of them went to paying bills, utilities, groceries. The second time it went out, it was substantially less. And I think the third one, even materially less, were used, which said that people didn't really need them at that time. It went into checking and savings. People weren't living off of them. They weren't buying groceries with them. I wondered if they were just putting them in checking and savings until COVID was over and they could buy a four-wheeler or a jet ski or something like that with government money. Are you afraid that people that get maybe a $5,000 check, a $6,000 check, might not manage it well?
I'm far more afraid that the government getting our tax money is not going to manage it well, as DOGE has documented.
I was just getting to that. I was just getting to what they would do with the 20%.
I'd rather give the 20% to the American people than give it to bureaucrats in Washington. But I think it's a totally fair question. I mean, we went through the worst inflation in 40 years under the Biden-Harris administration. And there's several reasons for that. A couple of them have to do with the big spending. So to your point about stimulus checks, there was total of $6 trillion spent by the government during the pandemic. $6 trillion. Only 12% of that was stimulus checks. So stimulus checks get a really bad rap. They certainly didn't help things in terms of the inflation picture, but 88% of the spending during COVID was not stimulus checks. The second point is you have to understand the context. The context back during COVID was we had a labor shortage. We had a supply chain disruption. We had lockdowns from sea to shining sea, rolling lockdowns in some states like California and New York for upwards of 2.5 years. And so those lockdowns, those dislocations, those labor shortages added on to the inflation from the fiscal spending. And then lastly, of course, you had the geopolitical tensions, Ukraine's invasion in early 2022, which kickstarted another round of oil and gas price inflation. And so very different situation now. There's no geopolitical tension that's pushing up oil prices. In fact, gas prices are at their lowest levels today in 4 years. We've got no labor shortage, no lockdowns, obviously, and we have an administration that is very much anti-regulation, pulling back fiscal spending and so on. And so the last point I would make on this is that it's not new to send folks a refund check. In fact, we do it every year. It's called the tax refund season. And just last year, we sent 100 million Americans a check. of about $3,100 on average, and there was no spike in inflation. So I would say that, when you look at polling data on this, 70% of Americans say they would use a check like this to pay down debt. Paying down debt is not paying down a four-wheeler or going out and buying a new flat screen TV. It is shoring up your family's finances after 4 difficult years. And that's exactly what I trust Americans will do. And I trust them to be better stewards of that 20% than Washington.
Yeah, I'm being devil's advocate in asking the questions that I think people are asking. I
appreciate it.
I would trust them with it more than I would some government agency, for sure. I focus on the heartland, not the bubbles on the two coasts. I think most Americans know the value of a dollar. I think they appreciate the value of a dollar. And I think if they get this kind of money back, I think they have a list of things they would do with it. And I would hope that they would carve a little bit of it out to celebrate with, to have some fun with, and not just pay debt down. I mean, come on, you got to give yourself a break sometimes. I do hope people would take maybe a vacation they wouldn't take otherwise, or they might do some things that they wouldn't ordinarily do and not just pay their electric bill with it and all. I would hope they would do some of that. So, I asked the devil's advocate question, but I think most Americans work hard, and I think they know the value of a dollar, and I think they would use it responsibly, and I think they have used it responsibly for the most part. You think this would actually stimulate the workforce some? Why?
I do. And the reason why is because to get the DOGE dividend check, if you're of the working age right now, is you have to be paying into the system, paying federal income tax, which means you got to be working. And so right now, there are 7 million working age men in America who are not working. When you combine the DOGE dividend check with no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, what you're effectively telling people is there is a check and increased pay right around the corner if you enter the workforce today. And that will, I believe, pull some people off the sidelines and say, hey, I can get a check, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, my all-in pay increases. That's something that I want to be a part of. And so I do believe that when you tell people that their pay will increase and that they expect a check with their name on it when the end of DOGE happens, that yes, you will incentivize a lot of people. Think of it as a signing bonus, but not right now, but to come later, that, hey, I could get upwards of a several $1,000 check if I start working today and start paying into this federal income tax system.
Yeah, this is very different from when people are sitting on the sidelines and the supply chain is shut down. This is a very different situation than we had after the lockdown. Hopefully, this really would be a stimulus, which I don't know that it necessarily was before, but I think this would have a very different impact. And I do think that it does incentivize people to pay attention to what the government is doing. I know a lot of people will have opinions that, don't really amount to anything because they're just frustrated in that moment. But if there are enough people to sort through that and actually find the gems in there where they can really find some waste, fraud, and abuse, they're incentivized to do that. That could really be a giant boost to DOGE in finding this stuff. I like people being deputized. I like them being involved because the name of my network is Merit TV, and I didn't choose that by accident. This is a meritocracy. The merit system in America, I think, is the heart of the system, and the president and I have talked about that a lot, and I think that's incredibly important. Where do you come down on that issue?
Absolutely. It's an issue where you unify the country. You should be hired on what you bring to the table, your merit, not the color of your skin, not your gender, not your sexual preference, et cetera, et cetera. Growing up, my mom, who's a legal immigrant from South America, she would tell me that she was always reluctant to apply for jobs with public affirmative action programs because, Dr. Phil, she wanted to be hired knowing that she was brought on not because she checked some arbitrary diversity box, but because she brought some real skill, talent, and merit to the table. And I think it's really this simple. Every American deserves dignity in their employment. The dignity of knowing that they were hired on skill and merit and the dignity of knowing that they were not excluded because their race was not convenient or their gender was not considered privileged.
Yeah, I've been in the healthcare delivery system for so much of my professional career, and I've been very close friends with minority doctors. And one of their biggest frustrations was, I have to carry with me my whole career people looking at me, and because I'm Black, they think, okay, he got a free pass. He got here because he's Black. They'd say I had to work twice as hard because I'm Black to overcome people thinking I'm a diversity doctor. And that is such crap. I've had to fight that my whole career, and I hate that. I hate this, that I have to deal with that. I worked my butt off to get here. I took the same test, the same internship, the same residency program as everybody else, and still people are like, yeah, I'd rather take the next guy. It really is a burden to so many of them that they really have had to carry that, and it's been a real frustration. I've had several of them tell me that.
That's right. And it's not fair. And you don't necessarily even blame the patient, you blame the system for saying, you walk into a hospital and the hospital is a big banner. We hire Black doctors. We have a program that says that 40% of new doctors must be Black. You don't blame the patient for drawing the wrong conclusion, because what did the hospital just say? We are going to hire Black doctors no matter what. And the truth is that Black doctors, Hispanic doctors, white are just as qualified as anyone else. They don't deserve to be stigmatized with that slur. And it's a slur, Dr. Phil, diversity hire. It is a slur, and it's not the patients who are murmuring behind the backs of the doctor who are responsible for the slur. It is a system that sets up DEI quotas and affirmative action programs that say that, oh, you're Black, we need to lower the standards for you, effectively admitting that these people are of somehow a lesser quality, which is not true. That is the real act of racism here, is saying that Black Americans somehow need a cheat code, need to be ushered in the back door because they are not qualified. They are eminently qualified. And that's why the merit system and the work that you're doing and the work that President Trump is doing is so important.